This is Marco Reus.
This is Shinji Kagawa.
This is Nuri Shahin.
Hello, this is Jadon Sancho.
And you're listening to the Yellow Wall podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 479 of the Yellow Wall Pods. I'm your host Stefan Butzko, and today we will talk about an emotional farewell of Marco Reus, Lars Ricken's presentation as the new CEO of Sport, and I put it here in my notes, the Bundesliga season. We'll see. For that and more, joins me Matthias Zug. Hello Matthias, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. How are you doing?
Yeah, it's been emotional days. If you're a fan of Borussia Dortmund, I think reaching a Champions League final itself is a very emotional thing. Then expectations going into the Champions League final, the anticipation, Vorfreude, these kind of things. I don't know how you feel about it, but I'm certainly occupied with the black and yellows ever since they reached the Champions League final. Like it's more on my mind than it usually is these days. Let's put it this way. And then of course, Marco Reus having this very emotional farewell from the Westfalenstadion on Saturday against Darmstadt, scoring his 100th goal in the Westfalenstadion, grabbing his 300th scoring assist or goal contribution rather as a Dortmund player, and just. Overall a very emotional day. I've been in my feelings a lot, if that makes sense. Matthias, how have you witnessed the last weeks and days of Borussia Dortmund? I don't think we even talked about the Mainz game, to be honest, but whatever, who cares?
Yeah, that's kind of the prevailing malaise around the Bundesliga, that Mainz game was just such a weird match overall. And I think if we look at the last 3 weeks of the Bundesliga, it's kind of symptomatic of the season a little bit. Last match day was great. The match day before that against Mainz was bad, but it was good for Mainz. So, at the end of the day, Mainz staying in the Bundesliga, I think, is good. Overall, I have nothing against that club. They tend to, they kind of helped Dortmund out a little bit with a certain coach at one point, I think. But no, my thoughts are very much around Borussia Dortmund right now. I've got drinking out of...
I must say though, Matthias, sorry for intervening, but people really expected Dortmund to beat Mainz when Dortmund had nothing going for them. They couldn't even beat Mainz when Dortmund had everything to win in the home match and Mainz had nothing to play for. So how did people exactly think that this was going to be an easy win for Dortmund? Also, I'm sorry, Cologne, but... as mad as you all were, if you then turn around and lose, what was it, 4-1 in the end to Heidenheim, then just shut up. I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day,
it didn't matter. Maybe for Bochum
it definitely did for Bochum. You have 34 matches to not get relegated, just like you have 34 matches to win a Bundesliga title. And yeah, sometimes when it's really tight, it can come down to one match. But for Köln fans, after, you have to say, a really, really bad season, the only thing saving Köln is that Darmstadt were really, really bad. Darmstadt losing 23 of 34 matches. That's really bad. But it's good for Mainz. I don't mind 1. FC Köln. I actually like 1. FC Köln. I think the Bundesliga is better when Köln is in it. However, it falls into a lot of those clubs that I think the Bundesliga would benefit with having the club in there, a Hamburg, a Kaiserslautern. But if you mismanage things as negligently as they did, Dortmund losing to Mainz when Dortmund had nothing to play for, I don't think you can really blame that one.
Yeah, I'll be honest. to me that was almost expected, because even for the backups, if you will, just the emotional switch from a Champions League semi-final to a meaningless league game against Mainz, who had everything to play for. I just understand that you might not be 100% up for it, and these things happen. But honestly, we are not here to talk about this game, really, Matthias. But the Darmstadt match, I think we need to discuss a little bit. Maybe not so much what happened on the field, even though there's one thing that really bugged me. When Marco Reus scored that free kick, I saw a lot of people talk about the keeper being very nice to him for letting this one pass. And at least in my perception, I don't think a goalkeeper can do much about this unless you really do speculate and position yourself perfectly for a free kick going into the top right corner there from the goalkeeper perspective, because I think that was just a wonderful free kick. It went just over the wall. It dipped very late, and that's that was that. To me, I don't think you can really save that one. I don't know how you saw it, Matthias, but to me it was just the expression of Marco Reus' skill.
I agree. No, it was a perfect goal. It was a perfect last home match for Marco Reus in a Borussia Dortmund shirt. And, after the match, I mean, even I have to admit, I got a little emotional as well. And now I have to admit, my emotions were a little bit raw that day anyway, because just before the Dortmund match kicked off, Preußen Münster secured their promotion to the Zweite Bundesliga for the first time since 1991. So, like, I was a bit of a blubbering mess to begin the match. And Marco Reus didn't help matters, so to speak. So it was a great way to start a Saturday, I have to say. I was in a very good mood.
Matthias, what did you think about the choreo for Marco Reus? Because I do believe it was on relative short notice when Reus made that announcement. So considering how amazing it looked, and once again, shout out to the Yellow Wall for it being pretty much pixel perfect, even though it is just a stand. It's probably really hard to correctly distribute all these little cards. For the stadium to look like this as Marco Reus walked on the field was just very pretty. How did you like this tifo?
No, I thought it was great, and given the time constraints that you just mentioned, they really gave their all, which I wouldn't expect anything else from the Yellow Wall, especially around a player with a club legend cult status around him like Marco Reus. And you also saw it after the match, of course, when Reus went into the Yellow Wall, that there's just such a tight relationship between him and the fans. I would have expected nothing less, and they delivered more than I expected.
Yeah, and to hear from Marco Reus what a special day it was at the end, that was basically exactly how he pictured it. And we all know that Marco Reus isn't a guy that really likes the limelight, but it was rather hard to avoid this time for him to just embrace it and to go on the Yellow Wall, and then of course to call up Marius Wolf, who himself said that basically a childhood dream was fulfilled in him playing for Dortmund, because he grew up a Dortmund fan, and for Morey, who obviously had not a time at Dortmund how he planned it, but I think for him, he also said that was probably one of the best experiences of his life, being there in the Yellow Wall. I don't know how you see it, but I think it was something that Marco Reus definitely deserved, and something that almost felt a little late for him to be up there. I mean, he was already up there after the Champions League semifinal, but it's been 12 years. I always feel like there was a bit of a distance between him and the fans, just because he does not like to embrace things. He's not someone who, like Kevin Großkreuz, for example, is is really someone that has this really tight relationship to the fans. Yeah, how did you perceive it, and how do you think that this exchange of love, if you will, I don't know what's the right word here? I don't even have the German word.
Well, it was very genuine. The whole situation. It looked very heartwarming. We already saw it after defeating PSG. That Marco Reus, that was already like his first step at his farewell tour, so to speak, and being up there in the stadium, them handing him a beer and everything like that. It was just very heartwarming. It felt honest. It felt like when you looked at Marco Reus in his face, I'm not going to say there was like a sense of relief, but he seemed incredibly at ease and relaxed in that moment. He wasn't, if you think of Jürgen Klopp's goodbye, Jürgen Klopp was a complete mess with crying and everything. And Marco Reus wasn't, and he's probably just not that kind of guy. But he just seemed very at ease in that moment, and that was really great to see.
Now, Matthias, I think we also have to talk about the elephant in the room. Mats Hummels sitting there after the game at the post, sort of lost in his thoughts. Do you really think this is going to be the last home match for Mats Hummels as well? Because I personally, to me, it's a tough one to swallow if it was, because he is a legend too, and he, I think, deserves a farewell in a much bigger frame, if you will, as well. But looking at these images, do you think it's also going to be the last one for him?
I kind of get the sense it is. Given that he sat there the way he did, it was like he was soaking it all in and living vicariously through Marco Reus in that moment, and thinking about, is this the last time I play for Borussia Dortmund in the Westfalenstadion? And it's... obviously we're completely interpreting into a situation. He may have just been tired after a long season and all that, but, Mats Hummels is a very intelligent person, and it seemed very reflective. It's kind of after Germany won the World Cup in 1990 and Franz Beckenbauer just was walking alone through the Stadio Olimpico in Rome. And the lights were out and everyone was celebrating, and he was just walking alone through the stadium without any players, anybody around him, kind of soaking it all in. And that's kind of what this reminded me of to a degree. So I'll be honest, I wouldn't be surprised at all if that's the last time Mats Hummels plays in the Westfalenstadion. I think it's sad that he doesn't get a proper send-off. Now, I know he had the Bayern chapter in between, but I feel like everyone's kind of moved on from that, given how well he's performed, even this late in his career. I feel bad for him because I feel he was looking at a Toni Kroos-like exit that was announced, of course, today, that Toni Kroos said once the Euros are over, he's going to end his career. But Mats Hummels wasn't selected for the Euros. So, right. As Lars Pollmann put it, Julian Nagelsmann robbed him of that type of grand stage exit. So I don't know because obviously the Euro announcement and all that hitting Mats Hummels at the same time, I think there's just a lot going on there for a man, at his age, in his mid-30s. He knows he's got at most probably 2 years left of professional football in him. And yeah, I think that was just an emotional moment. And my gut is telling me he won't play for Dortmund again next season, but I hope to be proven wrong.
Yeah, it is the same for me, even though I believe that for Mats Hummels, it would actually make sense to play another year just because he can do it, and I don't think there is a big reason not to do it. If I'm honest, so I would. I don't know. I also, there's a Club World Cup to be played for, so I don't know. I just feel that that would all be a little bit too early. Also, for Dortmund perspective, I think they have enough on their plate without trying to replace another world-class center back. I don't know how you see it, but considering the changes Dortmund probably have to make to their squad, and losing two pillars like Reus and Hummels in the dressing room at the same time, I find very tough. Now, I think we need to discuss the non-call up from Nagelsmann a little bit. A lot of people are talking about the reasoning behind it being that Mats Hummels would, create too much tension in the dressing room if he doesn't play. I personally don't get that feeling, but do you think that is going to be what's, in the end, the reason we'll learn about? I don't know.
I don't think we're ever going to get a reason. I think Nagelsmann's the type of person who's like, I don't need to justify shit.
Right. But do you think... But my question is, do you really think that it's Mats Hummels' character that is standing in the way of his own call-up? Because it can't be the performances.
I don't know.
Or do you think it's basically down to Germany trying to play with a higher line and Mats Hummels not being fast enough? Because that is the one aspect of his game that he obviously can make up for. And I think for Hummels to be really successful, you probably need to play a lower block than other teams might want to do.
That's probably the one I would lean into. I don't think the character thing, I think that's a little ludicrous. Thomas Müller isn't going to start. If Thomas Müller starts, please. I don't understand why. So there are a few things in that selection I don't get. I don't understand. I know the explanation that was given, but that doesn't mean I have to understand it. Four goalkeepers and Thomas Müller, but not Mats Hummels. I don't understand that. That reasoning per se doesn't work for me, especially on the four goalkeeper front. The tactical side, where I heard somebody say, well, Dortmund play so deep. I mean, okay, Dortmund don't play so deep. I mean, that's somehow there's this perspective that Dortmund play super deep, low block football all season long, but that must be from people who don't watch a lot of Dortmund matches.
Well, we don't, but we do in the Champions League a little bit more,
yes.
Which is maybe the reason why Dortmund are a bit more successful
Correct.
in the Champions League than in the league overall.
Correct, because in the Champions League, Dortmund faced a lot of teams that were favored against them. In the Bundesliga, it tends to be the other way around. I can see a tactical reason that you say, hey, he just doesn't have the pace. And in my opinion, when I saw the selection and the players, because every coach has their darlings, Nagelsmann will be no different. And without a doubt, it's going to be Rüdiger and Jonathan Tah starting as a central back pairing. Mats Hummels would not start. He probably wouldn't get a minute on the pitch if he was selected. And so I can understand, again, that he wasn't selected, even though at the same time, I don't understand why you then bring in a Thomas Müller. And you leave out some other players who had very good seasons, like a Julian Brandt, as an example. Julian Brandt would be a more impactful player than a Thomas Müller, without a doubt. That's not even up for a discussion. So it's just a little, there's some oddities in there, but I'm pretty sure Mats Hummels, after playing one of the best seasons of his career, not getting the call up, kind of like he didn't get selected for the Qatar World Cup, is a massive blow. Hopefully, it doesn't have the psychological knock-on effect that the non-selection after the Qatar World Cup did, where he had a pretty sizable dip in form, because, Dortmund kind of need him for one more match. That's kind of important. But he's also professional enough that I'm sure he's going to shake it off. There's enough time in between that he can process it and then say, okay, fine, I'll show you why you should have selected me. Now, granted, against Real Madrid, Dortmund are going to play a little bit deeper. So, but yeah, it's a shame for him on a personal level. It would have been a great way to end things.
Yeah, I'll be honest, Matthias. I don't really think it's going to drag him down, and especially, I mean, we'd only see it in one more game, and that'd be the Champions League final. But I think against Darmstadt, he played as well as he could. I mean, granted, Dortmund didn't really shift to the highest gear in this game. I think they had Darmstadt covered without really overextending themselves. That is now the Bundesliga season for Dortmund, who finish in fifth place. Obviously, after the Mainz game, it was pretty clear that obviously Dortmund would not be able to retain a chance to pip Leipzig, which they arguably would have had they beaten them on beaten Mainz on Saturday, because I think Leipzig only drew against Frankfurt, and then correct me if I'm wrong. Because I'm not good at math, I think Dortmund could have reached the top four.
They would have been a point ahead. They would have been on 66.
Yeah. Exactly. So, yeah. What do you make of the final table now? To me, I think obviously Leverkusen 90 points, 0 games unbeaten, just 6 draws. It's a ridiculous season. But to see Stuttgart in the end to leapfrog Bayern, I think is the correct thing, really, because I thought over the season Stuttgart were just a better team than Bayern. Bayern being third in the league overall is for them also a massive underperformance. Dortmund, I think, being behind Leipzig, and a Leipzig team that also didn't really play well under Marco Rose, 65 points for Leipzig is a bit embarrassing. And then, yeah, I'm glad that Frankfurt managed to keep ahead of TSG Hoffenheim. But yeah, now if we look at the predictions of you, Lars, and myself, I mean, obviously I put Dortmund in first place just because my reasoning was they played an amazing Rückrunde, and if they just keep this form up, there's a good chance that they might win it outright. just by being front runners. Obviously that did not materialize whatsoever. I think big factor is also that Sebastian Haller just completely fell out of form. But a few more factors also, obviously losing Jude Bellingham, who's arguably one of the best midfielders in the world already, might contribute to that as well. So that was probably more hope than a realistic prediction. But you guys were also wrong, because you both put Bayern in first place. Lars's top four were Bayern, Leipzig, Dortmund, and Leverkusen. Yours were Bayern, Dortmund, Leverkusen, and Leipzig. And mine were Dortmund, Bayern, Leverkusen, and Leipzig. So almost correct, but no one really predicted Stuttgart to be this high. You had Stuttgart in 13th, so did Lars, and I had them in 14th. So that really shows how little we know about the Bundesliga. So to you, what was the bigger surprise? Leverkusen going unbeaten and actually winning the league, considering they're literally called Leverkusen, or Stuttgart finishing in second place from last season, where they did not play all that great?
In my opinion, it's Stuttgart. Much, much more so, because Leverkusen, Xabi Alonso, given where he took over Leverkusen, I think they were 17th at the time, and he brought them into the Europa League spots, and the money that Leverkusen can just dish out versus what Stuttgart had to do with Hoeneß, who basically had to use more or less the same pieces he had previously. And, the table don't lie. I mean, if I look at just at an XG table versus goals, Stuttgart, that is their performance. I mean, they scored 78 goals. They have just under 71 XG, and XG against 38. They conceded 39. You compare that to Leverkusen, they scored 89 goals and their XG was 73. So they way overperformed their expected goals. Whereas Stuttgart, this is for real. They played incredibly well. They were incredibly dangerous. You can see what Hoeneß was able to do with a full offseason, because he took over Stuttgart when they were, going to be relegated essentially. And he saved them as well. Not as dramatically the same season as Xabi Alonso did with Leverkusen. But if it wasn't for Leverkusen, the team of the season would be Stuttgart, without a doubt, because they played so incredibly well throughout. And they got so much out of players that before you really didn't get much out of. They were inconsistent. Christian Führig is an example, former Dortmunder. He's talented, but never like, whoa, and now he's going to be playing for Germany. Guirassy couldn't score before, and now he was scoring at the same rate as Harry Kane. Just injuries hampered him. Dennis Undav, another example. So Stuttgart are, for me, the bigger surprise. Leverkusen going through a season undefeated, of course, that's huge because it's never, ever happened in the Bundesliga. And the fact that they could go through an entire season potentially in 3 competitions undefeated is unbelievable.
It's unheard of, really.
But you also can't forget how many last minute goals they've scored to make that happen. I mean, I watched the Roma match where they scored with the last kick, and boom, that was a draw. So they didn't lose.
Just the 2 games against Karabakh Akta.
Yeah. Or even the second match against Dortmund. That was.
Don't remind me. I'm still pissed about that one.
I mean, there were so many times where, and that's not down to tactics per se. For me, that's down to coaching and self-belief. There's no doubt Xabi Alonso can be, he can be a Guardiola Klopp-esque coach, without a doubt. He's proven that at Leverkusen. But Leverkusen have different financial means than, say, Stuttgart did at that time. Heck, Leverkusen have different financial means than Borussia Dortmund has. Let's be honest. And their difference was they got the recruitment right with older players. And, of course, they have Florian Wirtz, who's pretty decent, I've heard. So
here's the thing. I don't know how to describe it to people who don't know really about, the advantage that Leverkusen, Wolfsburg, etc. have. But if you take goal, for example, they basically have unlimited mulligans. Because Leverkusen were in a relegation zone at the end of last season, at the end of the last season's Hinrunde, I think. And to go from that to this season just tells you that if they screw up, just like Wolfsburg can, when Wolfsburg were almost relegated, they just signed Max Kruse and it sort of saved them. And obviously, couple contract changes here and there, but budget wise, they just never need to be afraid. They can just make unlimited shitty decisions, and they can always get bailed out by their companies, essentially, and eventually, and honestly, more often than it does, they should be successful. And this time it sort of worked out, but at the same time, Leverkusen are not a big team per se. And that means they will probably fade away into oblivion relatively soonish. Maybe I'm wrong about this, but I assume in three seasons' time, Leverkusen will be where they always are, maybe like somewhere between 4th and 7th. I don't know how you see it, but this is where I see Leverkusen's trajectory. Once Alonso is gone, they will be back where they sort of always were. Sometimes they play for the Champions League, sometimes they play for 2nd or 1st place. But most of the time, it's somewhere between 4th and 8th, maybe. I don't know how you see it, but this is sort of my expectation for Leverkusen.
I agree completely. It'll all hinge on Xabi Alonso. I expect him to leave after next season because Carlo Ancelotti's contract will be up at Real Madrid. That's the job he wants. That's the job I believe would fit, actually. I personally think it would be great to have a Real Madrid legend, a Spain footballing legend, to be in charge of Real Madrid. It's nice, actually. And the more healthy rivalry than the coaches can have between Real Madrid and Barcelona, with Xavi at Barcelona still. But I also believe Leverkusen will revert to form because, and I've tried to explain this to people, well, one, the pillars of this season, in 3 years will be in their early 30s. So Granit Xhaka, undoubtedly one of the key players. Florian Wirtz in 3 seasons will not be a Leverkusen player anymore. Grimaldo already wants to leave. Victor Boniface will leave. These are players that will leave. And the reason why is not because they're getting underpaid at Bayer Leverkusen. It's because it's Leverkusen. And people don't quite understand that, Leverkusen, and this is kind of the downside also for Wolfsburg, is it's not. I mean, there's a reason Max Kruse always drove to Berlin to party all the time, because there's just no draw to Wolfsburg. Now, Wolfsburg at least has more history and culture behind it than Leverkusen. Leverkusen didn't exist until 1930 as a city, because it was just a mishmash, I think, of 5 or 6 different towns, and it's named after a pharmacist, which is I just find funny. But yeah, there's really nothing there. It's kind of like with RB Leipzig. Now, Leipzig is a better city in that sense than, say, Leverkusen, but the club means nothing to these players. It's a paycheck. It's really nothing else. There is no yellow wall. There is no history of, say, like Bayern. Bayern have a history there. You're going to be playing at a club where some of the greatest players to have ever played football in world history have played. That means something to players. Borussia Dortmund, the emotion, the passion, the stadium, everything, the culture, that means something. Look at Oliver Glasner. I think he's a great example. He was coaching at Wolfsburg when Wolfsburg were in a higher position than Eintracht Frankfurt. Wolfsburg have more money. They can spend more than Frankfurt. He left Wolfsburg to coach Frankfurt and led them to win a Europa League where it just means more. And because there's way more passion, there's more history, there's more tradition. And for him, that also meant more than Wolfsburg was a paycheck. Leipzig, the only one where it's not just a paycheck at Leipzig is probably Marco Rose, because he's from Leipzig. But most of those players, they don't. There's no emotional connection there. There's no. If you look at someone like Jadon Sancho, a young guy, came from England, had really no connection to Dortmund, but he came to Dortmund. He grew up in Dortmund, essentially, and he came back to Dortmund and said, it's like I feel home. You're not going to get that at Bayer Leverkusen or RB Leipzig or TSG Hoffenheim. That just doesn't exist there for players like it will at a Dortmund, a Bayern, a Stuttgart, even a smaller club like SC Freiburg. I mean, Matthias Ginter went back to Freiburg when he was arguably still good enough to play for a quote-unquote better, bigger club. But it meant something to him. And that's just not ever going to be the case at Leverkusen. Ever.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you brought up Jadon Sancho, who obviously, I don't know if you saw this one reel from Marco Reus's free kick goal, which was a really awesome close-up, but you can also see him say, "It's your day, bro," sort of making the decision that it was obviously Marco Reus going to take the free kick. And once again, to me, Marco Reus had to score in this game, and the fact that he did it via direct free kick just made me really happy, because it once again displayed how good he is, what he can do with the ball, and to me, an obvious club legend forever. However, Jadon Sancho being there for the Marco Reus farewell tour, I think, has benefited Jadon Sancho quite a lot too, because I think his close connection not only to Dortmund but also to Marco Reus is something we need to talk about. And I tweeted about it a little bit in jest that Dortmund need to consider how functional Jadon Sancho can be at Dortmund without Marco Reus. But I do think there's a little bit of validity to that point of view, because the relationship between Marco Reus and Sancho is huge, and maybe not to go off on another tangent, but Marco Reus's value for Dortmund, pretty much every player that came in, they all always quoted Marco Reus as being like a huge part for them, for Julian Brandt, for example, to even join Dortmund, but in general, just to the whole integration, arriving at Dortmund, being comfortable in the team and in the locker room. They always cite Marco Reus as one of the biggest contributors to them feeling comfortable in Dortmund. I think we should always mention that and cannot discount that when we talk about a guy being valuable in the locker room, even if he is not the loudmouth captain, if you will, and maybe not the most vocal leader on the pitch, but he did his leadership in so many other very tangible ways. But yeah, Jadon Sancho, I think blossoming again in Dortmund is something really beautiful to see. And I'll be honest, obviously Ian Maatsen scored and Jadon Sancho had a great game. Where we currently stand, I would really love for those two players to remain in Dortmund. I don't know how realistic it is to retain them, but Jadon Sancho has balled out in Dortmund again, I think, in this stint. It took him a little while to get back to form, obviously, after not training for 8 million months really with the team, but I think right now he is on a level where he can be a major contributor. And if you sign him to a long-term deal now, in the age he is in, I think you would have a grown-up player that you have, for the most part, developed yourself, and someone who identifies with the club quite a lot. I don't know how you see it, but once again, I think Jadon Sancho, to me, absolutely belongs in a black and yellow shirt, and that's exactly what I want to see going forward. Same goes for Ian Maatsen. There was a point where for Maatsen I thought, okay, maybe he's not quite worth 35 million, but if this is the clause and looking how much he contributes for Dortmund as a left back, how valuable he already is for the build-up play, and the hustle he is showing, and he's still fairly young. I don't know how you see it, but I think Dortmund should stretch a little financially, if that makes sense, to retain those two players. I think, to me, now that the season is pretty much almost over and we had time to assess it, for me, those decisions are made. What are your thoughts?
Well, I agree. I mean, they were such difference makers. If I'd have to pick, Ian Maatsen would be the highest priority for me, because the difference in Dortmund's build-up play, ball retention, and defensive play was it was night and day. The moment he showed up. You could see
when he came on against Mainz, just the difference he made.
It was incredible. His first match he played, I'm like, whoa. And I remember I texted a buddy of mine from the Netherlands, kind of asked him about Maatsen, and all of his predictions are true. Yeah, I mean, he has some deficiencies defensively, but I believe almost every fullback does who has an offensive output has a defensive deficiency. But his upside is so huge and his downside is so minimal. Especially, I mean, he was a huge upgrade over Guerrero, and that's not necessarily something I would have expected. Now, defensively, I couldn't expect it to get any worse than Guerrero. But, I mean, defensively, Bensebaini was an upgrade over Guerrero. But that's not hard because Guerrero doesn't defend. But Ian Maatsen, I mean, without a doubt, I mean, if Dortmund can afford to stretch for him and Sancho, awesome. If it's only one, I'll be honest, my pick would be Ian Maatsen, because that is such a difficult position to find someone for of that quality, especially when his family and he have made it public. They want to stay in Dortmund. That is where they want. They don't want to go back to Chelsea. They want Dortmund. And that's a really nice ball in your court as Dortmund when it comes to talking to Chelsea. Obviously, Jadon Sancho would want to stay, but that comes down to if Ten Hag gets sacked, which I'd be shocked if he doesn't, honestly, because Manchester United are just so incredibly bad. That opens up a new door for Jadon Sancho. If Ten Hag stays, you talk again, maybe you just extend the loan another season. Because the problem with Jadon Sancho wouldn't be a transfer fee necessarily, it'd be the wages. They would blow up the wage structure. And I don't know if Jadon Sancho is sentimental enough to take a massive pay cut to stay at Dortmund, but play. So especially
fair enough.
Especially when you think of if Gareth Southgate stays England manager, he's got a very you have to play in the Premier League bias. Established. Yeah, he's played Sancho, of course, but he prefers Premier League players. Now Bellingham, he can't ignore Bellingham because he's one of the 5 best players in the world. So it really comes down to what Jadon Sancho values the most. And then, of course, if Manchester United are willing to part with him. I think Chelsea would be willing to part with Ian Maatsen because they need cash. They need money in the door. Also, just because their finances are all over the place. And the players publicly said, I want to stay at Dortmund. So I think that's the more likely of the two to stay. If they could get both, awesome. If you can only get one, my vote, unfortunately, for Jadon Sancho, would have to go with Ian Maatsen.
Yeah, but you're also not wrong. You know, I think this is correct. Also, Dortmund have more Sancho-like players on their wings. You know, I think Sancho would be easier to compensate. While, I mean, Bensebaini has been out for a while, and obviously he is on fairly high wages too, which is a bit annoying. But I think you just have to correct for that. Now, Matthias, as we are already talking a little bit about squad planning and squad building, Lars Ricken finally had his official news conference, the announcement, and it's not like I've written down 8 million quotes, but I do think he made a very competent impression, and what I found the most interesting is that basically, to me, when the news first broke, first of all, obviously nobody saw it coming, and second of all, a lot of people weren't quite sure if Lars Ricken, you know, really wanted a job like this, or if Dortmund had to convince him, sort of. But from this news conference, what came about, at least to me, what revealed itself, that Lars Ricken is very ambitious and had something in mind like this previously. He sort of alluded to that, you know, even the sporting director role or technical director role, while he didn't quite say it, but he sort of alluded to it. Those were probably things he might have eyed beforehand too, sort of Sebastian Kehl's job now. And Lars Ricken did explain that a lot of guys in the Bundesliga who are doing his job now, be it Oliver Runert or I think Markus Kosch is also someone who he mentioned, is that they sort of all got their experiences at the youth departments beforehand too, and that the youth department job is a very complex one because you're a sporting director, technical director, scout, squad planner, someone that negotiates with the agents, with the parents, educator. All these things were mentioned. That this is a role that really does prepare you for a job like that. Now, obviously, being the CEO of sport of Borussia Dortmund, arguably second biggest club in Germany and one of the biggest clubs in world football, is not an easy task for anyone, and I'm sure you will need a little bit of time to grow into. But at least for me, coming out of this news conference and the official presentation of Lars Ricken, I felt even more comforted with this decision, because to me he made a very good impression, like a very reasonable guy and someone who will absolutely give everything to achieve the goals in Dortmund. Now, obviously, we don't know what his sporting decisions will be and what his philosophy will be and how he will shape Dortmund, and we will obviously have to reevaluate that in 2, 3, 4, whatever seasons. But at least for me personally, like I said, I felt very confident. I don't know if you saw the news conference, Matthias, but if you did, what are sort of your takes on Dortmund finally, almost 14 days too late, maybe even 4 weeks too late, making him finally official in a public setting?
I think it fit. It worked just with the timing near the end of the season now. It was nice to kind of see him in that seating area where all the royalty sits, so to speak, the royal box. Yeah, I'm optimistic about the new constellation, kind of a generational change, and it happening in an easy, non-controversial, organic internal fashion, and without the drama that you see at clubs like Stuttgart or Köln or Hamburg or Bayern, where it just sometimes it just devolves into this soap opera. And Dortmund obviously could have gone that way when you're looking at someone as large of a figure, both in terms of what he's meant to the club and personality-wise as Aki Watzke, parting, who fills that void, and they are filling it with competencies and specialized competencies. And I think that's very, very important. And that is the setup for the future. So no, I'm obviously very happy that it's someone like Lars Ricken, where the club means so much to him, and it's not just a job.
Yeah, I mean, he said himself how he grew up, in Dortmund, and Dortmund only being the only club he ever played for. So I don't know how you see it, but to me it's a little bit funny almost that after Michael Zorc, who obviously one of the biggest club legends, if not the biggest one considering his vita, now Dortmund have found another guy with a CV, starting with Dortmund born basically, to run things here in a greater sense of the word. Obviously he's the one more or less with the final decision, but the buck stops, at least when it comes to the sporting decisions, with Lars Ricken now, and I'm feeling very comfortable in that. Obviously the word Stallgeruch was thrown around a little bit, where Dortmund were sort of swimming in their own soup a little bit too much. And maybe that's correct, but I don't know. I think that Lars Ricken is actually the perfect guy for the job. And I think that Dortmund are going to have a lot of success with him in the coming years. And I think, as you said, the setup with Kehl and Mislintat and so on, I think is going to work out pretty well. But that being said, today I'm reading rumors about Sebastian Kehl being linked with the sporting director job at VfL Wolfsburg. Matthias, do you think these are rumors that we should pay any attention to, and do you think it is realistic that Sebastian Kehl, considering the recent decisions at Dortmund, is looking for an out?
Well, I guess everything is reasonable to think about. VfL Wolfsburg can obviously pay a lot of money and maybe offer him the sole power job, so to speak. Kehl, unlike Ricken or Zorc, is obviously not from Dortmund. He started his career at Freiburg, but he celebrated his biggest successes while at Dortmund, and he's been associated with Dortmund now for more than 20 years. So he's essentially a Borussia Dortmund guy. So, I mean, I don't know how much credibility I would give such rumors, but I wouldn't completely discount them. I would be extraordinarily disappointed if that were the case, though.
Yeah, also because of what Wolfsburg are. It's difficult, of course, but I feel like if you are Sebastian Kehl and you move to Wolfsburg, that makes things a little weird for me. I don't know, just because what Dortmund stands for is a lot of things that Wolfsburg really do not stand for. So, to then sort of go there and try to make this club as successful as possible is difficult for me personally. I don't know how you see it, but I'm struggling with that one. But yeah, I think overall Dortmund have things figured out for now, but with Kehl maybe extending his contract, maybe not extending his contract, I think we'll talk about that situation, the Dortmund Trinity, and whether this will all hold together or not a little bit more often going forward. But really intriguing. Any final thoughts on Dortmund's league season now that it's over, or do you think this is something we should discuss a little bit more in depth in one of the postseason episodes?
Well, I mean, we can't. I think it'll. That's a good question. It's a hard one because when I looked at kind of the numbers, this season is a season of underperformance in one key aspect. Dortmund just didn't score enough goals. Defensively, they overperformed their expected goals against. But defensively, I mean, if you just go by the numbers and goals conceded, they were better than Bayern.
Which is crazy.
I know, but Bayern outscored them by almost 30 goals. So
yeah, but isn't what the crazy part to me is that Bayern have spent 800 million. Well, not 800, but they've spent a significant amount on defenders in recent summers. Be it Delict or whatever, and for them to have this record really speaks about what a poor job Thomas Tuchel has done this season. Because I think if you're Bayern, you can't out concede Dortmund, who themselves didn't have the best defensive season. I mean, Dortmund still conceded 4 more goals than Stuttgart. They conceded 4 more goals than Leipzig. They conceded a ridiculous more amount than Leverkusen, who only conceded 24 goals. Edin Terzic made it a goal for Dortmund to basically average 1 goal against. He said 34 goals is sort of the benchmark. Now that it's 43, means he's either dyslexic or things didn't work out so well. I don't know how you see it, but I mean, overperformance expected goals probably because Gregor Kobel is amazing, but still that doesn't mean that Dortmund, to me, defended well at all this season.
No, I think they were improved over previous seasons overall, defensively, but it just, and part of defense is a good offense. If you're dominating possession, if you're dominating in the other opponent's half, specifically in the final third, like a Leverkusen, you just don't give the opponent a lot of opportunities to put you under that kind of pressure. And that's really the issue with Dortmund in the league this season, has been exactly that. It's been inconsistent, some good runs, but then those good runs come to an end, usually dramatically. And I think there are some serious question marks when it comes to your build-up play, your hold-up play, and then, of course, transitionally, actually, Dortmund did okay. They've scored a lot of great goals on the counterattack. But a lot of times when the opponent ceded possession of Dortmund, they just didn't really know what to do with it. I mean, Dortmund lost plenty of matches where they had nearly 70% possession. And they should have done so much more with. Now, we're going to ignore a match like, say, the Stuttgart loss, because I still don't know how Dortmund didn't win that match.
The one at home.
Yeah, the one at home, because that's a match you play the same game again, probably 9 out of 10 times Dortmund will win that one, or at least 6 or 7 out of 10 times.
I would say it was more of a 50-50 game, maybe 55-45 pro Dortmund, but I'm there with you. It was probably the same feeling Dortmund had on that particular day than as PSG had when they played the semifinal, because it felt like Dortmund were never going to score. I mean, that one missed chance by Schlotterbeck right on the line, basically, was ridiculous. But I think you're right that Dortmund didn't score enough goals, because goals conceded were 43, as I said before. Last season was 44. But last season Dortmund had 83 goals scored, and this time it was 68. So the goal difference went from a plus 39 to a plus 25. And I do agree with you that the scoring output is nowhere near good enough this season. I think in the second half of the season it has picked up a little bit, but I mean the last time Dortmund had a worse goal difference, you actually have to go back to 2017, 2018, where they had a plus 17 and finished fourth, where they also only scored 64 goals and conceded 47. But I think you're right that Dortmund definitely need to score a good 20-25% more goals than they did this season, next season. I agree with you there. Well, and maybe signing Girassi in that regard helps.
Yeah, I mean, your top goal scorer was Daniel Mahn with 13 goals. And then you had Niklas Füllkrug with 12. And then rounding out the top four were Julian Brandt and Marco Reus. I mean, Marco Reus had 14 scorer points, and that's an issue because after that, it's a massive drop off. I think there are some clear disappointments. I didn't realize it until I looked at the stats that Jamie Bino-Gittens really didn't contribute much statistically. He scored 1 goal. He had 3 or 4 assists. But the drop off from him versus Brandt, Reus, and Daniel Mahn was significant. Now he had injuries, of course. You can't forget that. Sebastian Aller, it's a write-off season. It's really one of those, it was injury after injury after injury, but he had 1 assist, and that was it. He had no goal. Moukoko had 5 goals, and he only started 5 matches. So it just there's something missing there that needs to be addressed in terms of playmaking ability. I like the way Zabitza came onto form in the second half of the season, So this is the last quarter of the season. But he's also not getting any younger. And that's an area that needs to be addressed, is how will you create more dominant possession in the opponent's third and more goal scoring opportunities from it. Because if you look at Leverkusen or Stuttgart, they were able to do that consistently, and Dortmund were not. Like, there's just this clear difference there. And
Leverkusen and Stuttgart also did it tactically.
Yes, they did it tactically, but you can't tell me Stuttgart, pound for pound, have better players. So you have to look at, okay, where's the issue there? Is it down to coaching? Is it down to tactical acumen there? Is it down to coaching philosophy? Because, I mean, the season you spoke about as far as goals scored and goal difference, that was the Peter Stöger, Peter Bosch, where you went from one extreme to the next. And so that was kind of the write-off season where he somehow eked out 4th place in the end. This is not that. They did not make 4th place. Like, that's the absolute minimum. Now, granted, they're going to be in the Champions League regardless, but it wasn't necessarily, hey, make the Champions League. It was about being in the top 2, and they're miles behind that. And I think the question around Edin Terzic will be asked after the season. Now, if Dortmund win the Champions League, I'll be the first to say, okay, you can't fire the guy, because that would just be really, really weird. And I think even right now, I don't know if you can necessarily fire him, because it's not like he's massively failed at Dortmund in the, 2.5 seasons he's had. He almost, a goal away from winning the Bundesliga title. They won the DFB Pokal, and they're in a Champions League final. For the majority of clubs, that's pretty good. But when you look at it holistically, there's something missing there, and he's still learning. He's still a young manager who's inexperienced, and he's learning on the job, but he's learning on the job at Borussia Dortmund and not at Eintracht Braunschweig. And there's just a different spotlight on you in that moment. So that's going to have to kind of be do we trust this setup with him and Benda and Şahin going into another season with a reloaded squad because they need to? Or is this all right, start from scratch all over again? And then the question is, who would you even get? To be honest,
Right.
There's just when I look at who is available, that would make sense, that would take Dortmund to the next level or back to their old level. There's no coach out there that I feel confident would be able to do that. And at that point, you may as well stick with Terzic, who can game manage performances, because obviously they're in the Champions League final. You don't get that far if you're not able to do something right. And, obviously Thomas Tuchel is a non-starter. And after that, the only other manager I kind of looked at would have been cool. He got snapped up by Crystal Palace and is doing really well with them, and that's Oliver Glasner. And then after that, there's nobody really there that I'd be like, yeah, that they'll make a marked difference over what Terzic is doing. That's the thing. It can't just be light. It would need to be a big step forward. And, obviously it's not a Xabi Alonso. It's not a Sebastian Hoeneß or anybody like that. So you're kind of sitting there going, well, then what?
Well, here's the thing. I actually don't think Oliver Glasner would have been a good fit for Dortmund. I'll be honest, because his coaching philosophy, be it at Wolfsburg or be it at Frankfurt, I haven't seen much of what he's done at Crystal Palace now. But he is also a very defensive-oriented coach, and he is also not reinventing the wheel in possession football. And I think this season, if we talk about eras of the Bundesliga and tactical systems and setups, if there's one thing to say about this season in particular, is that gegenpressing is dead, and that this era of football, what the Bundesliga was after Jürgen Klopp and Pep Guardiola, or rather after Jürgen Klopp, more or less, for a good 5-6 years, where everyone played 4-2-3-1 and tried to counter press the opponent to shreds. For better or worse, I think those times are over, because both Leverkusen and Stuttgart had their success, and their really extreme success with playing an extremely well-crafted positional play and possession football. Obviously, counter-pressing and whatnot is really how you create off the ball, but it's less transition-oriented what Leverkusen and Stuttgart are doing, and more trying to find solutions with the ball. And to me, that was always the step where Dortmund needed to go after the Jürgen Klopp era, and where Dortmund wanted to go with Thomas Tuchel, but for many reasons it didn't work out. But I think this is overall the kind of football that Dortmund do need to be playing now. Obviously, club identity-wise, I think counter-pressing football fits a little bit better to Dortmund, but nevertheless, I do believe that if you want to have long-term success, possession football and the well-crafted positional play is probably the way to go. Can Dortmund under Terzic and the coaching staff in general, Schein, Bender, Sebastian Gebhardt, etc., can they actually pull this one off? Maybe. A lot of that also depends on the recruitment strategy, because obviously you can instill such a system with players that might not be perfect for it, but ideally you get the right players for it. But I think this is sort of the way Dortmund need to go going forward, and I think they have a lot of players that can play that sort of system. But the major problem with them is just the central midfield. As you said, playmaking, be it the number 6, number 8, these are two positions that Dortmund need to upgrade on. Emre Can, I think, is probably the first player on my list. Dortmund need to find a better player for. And the second one would be the number 8 position, because Felix Metscher had probably one of the biggest disappointing seasons of any 30 million edition. Sebastian Aller, I think, is excused in this season, but yeah, I personally don't really see, and maybe Felix Metscher will be an amazing number 8 in a few seasons, but I don't know. I just not see it right now, and I think Dortmund need a better number 6 and a better number 8 to make these things come true. I don't know how you see it, but obviously you might have to replace Mats Hummels, you might have to upgrade your fullback positions, but I think to me, apart from striker, finding a replacement for Sebastian Aller, I think it's the number 6 and number 8 positions that really will show us what direction we're going to go in going forward. So this is where I have my eye on the most. I don't know if Dortmund will solve these two positions this offseason. I can see that maybe they try to find a new number 6 and try to give Metscher more time. I don't know what's going to happen with Gio Reyna, but obviously I don't really think he's going to have a future at Dortmund either. He would be someone who could have played the number 8. He certainly has the skills to do that, but currently it doesn't look like Dortmund are going to bet on him. I don't know if they will and surprise me. But yeah, to me this is really where it's at for Dortmund, and yeah, I really have big question marks about whether Edin Terzic can get a positional play for Dortmund going where they actually gain a tactical edge over the opposition, because currently, more often than not, it feels like Dortmund have better talent, but they're not out-coaching anyone, if that makes sense.
Yeah, completely. I agree on all points.
Right. All right. I guess that's that was the final monologue then, because I got nothing more to say, Matthias. I don't know if you have any final thoughts, because we will have more final thoughts next week when we preview the Champions League final, aren't we?
Absolutely.
Right. So, yeah. Sorry for the messy podcast. I hope as people listen to it won't hear too much of that, because I'm good at editing. But Matthias, as always, thank you so much for coming on and discussing this final very emotional match day with me. And yeah, I can't wait for the next episode. We will then see if we can also not wait for the episode after that on June 2nd or whenever. I don't know if you even have time, Matthias.
Yeah, that's the timing's really not great. I wish the Champions League final could have moved up a day or so, but whatever. We'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out. Anyway, as always, thank you for listening. We'll be back with the Champions League preview episode next week. Until then, goodbye.